Special place where adults with developmental disabilities can go to find a safe haven, a place of wonderful opportunities and joy. Project ID has social opportunities, meal programs, fun recreation, career development, church services, and the largest Special Olympic team in the state. Project ID is a real community treasure. Please be a volunteer, sponsor a member, or donate what you can to Project ID, Identity Beyond Disability.
Hello, my loving peeps. I have missed you so much. Seems to me we're a little blurry, but that's okay. I don't like to be seen that well anyway. So anyway, it has been, almost a month, I think, since we've read Charley and the Chocolate Factory. It's been just crazy for Bob and I to connect at the same time. And then I've had some things going on in my life. One of the exciting things was that I got a new dog, and he has been trained to be a therapy dog. He's been out of it for a while. He passed everything except the leash stuff, so we're working on that. But otherwise, his name is Otis, and he won't come up in here because he's been trained not to get on couches. So I am going to show you a picture of Otis. You can't see him very well. It's pretty funny because, because he's a black dog and he has dark eyes. So I've been really struggling to get a picture of him. But I love him to death, and maybe you'll get to meet him sometime because he is very gentle and very well behaved. Every time I have to say something, I just have to say, Otis. And even if he's with another dog or playing with his ball, I say, Otis, come. He just drops everything and comes running. And he does all the other things he's supposed to. So he's also going to help if I lose my balance or something. He can kind of tell when things are happening. So I hope you'll get to meet him sometime. Actually, at least we're in phase 2, and we've been at it a long time without it getting worse. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a couple of months and then we can get going again. And then if we want to do some reading, we can do it in person in the theater. That would be lots of fun, and Otis can come and listen too. But today we are finally back at Charley and the Chocolate Factory. As you remember, if you do, it's been so long ago, Willy Wonka has a huge chocolate factory, but it had been closed for many, many years. Nobody knew why, but the chocolate kept coming, but nobody was allowed in. And then Willy Wonka put out golden tickets, and the 5 people that got the golden tickets got to come in to Willy Wonka's factory and see everything that was going on. Now, Charley, as you remember, was a very, very poor young man. And he never thought he'd get a golden ticket, but he did. And so he and his grandfather is very old, but they are now inside Willy Wonka's factory. And they've gone through a really little hallway, and they've done some things to get in, but they have now arrived at the chocolate room. So here goes with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in the chocolate room. An important room, this, cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one into the keyhole of the door. This is the nerve center of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go then. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. Don't get overexcited, and stay very calm. Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their way in, and oh, what amazing sight! It was better than anything that could meet their eyes. They were looking down in a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley, and along the bottom of it flowed a great brown river. What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall halfway along the river, a steep cliff over which the water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, and then went crashing down into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Below the waterfall, and this is the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous glass pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere very high up in the ceiling. They really were enormous, I tell you, those pipes. There must have been a dozen of them at least, and they were sucking up the brownish, muddy water from the river and carrying it away to goodness knows who where. And because can we go back just a little, Bob? They really were enormous, carrying it to goodness knows where. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling along inside them. And above the noise of the waterfall, you could hear the never-ending sucking sound of the pipes as they did their work. Graceful trees and bushes were growing up along the riverbanks. There were weeping willows and alders, and tall clumps of rhododendrons. Rhododendrons with their pink and red and mauve blossoms. In the meadow, there were thousands of buttercups. There, cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down and pointing his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot, melted chocolate of the finest quality, the very best quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country, and all the swimming pools as well. Isn't it terrific? And just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it away to all the other rooms in the factory where it is needed. Thousands of gallons an hour, my dear children. Thousands and thousands of gallons. The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and bedazzled. They were completely bowled over by the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. The waterfall is the most important, Mr. Wonka went on. It mixes the chocolate. It churns it up. It pounds it and beats it. It makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the world makes the chocolate by waterfall. It is the only way to do it properly. The only way. And do you like my trees? He cried, pointing with his stick. Ah, my lovely bushes. Don't you think they look pretty? I told you I hate ugliness. And of course, they are all edible, all made of something different and delicious. And do you like my meadow? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you're standing on, my dear little ones, is made of a new kind of soft, minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it smudge. Try a blade of it. Please do. It's delectable. Automatically, everybody bent down and picked up a blade of grass. Everyone, that is, except Augustus Gloop, who took a big handful, of course. And Violet Beauregard, before tasting her blade of grass, took the piece of record-breaking chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it carefully behind her ear. Isn't it wonderful? Whispered Charley. Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa? I could eat the whole field, said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. I could go around on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field. Try a buttercup, tried Mr. Wonka. They're even nicer. Suddenly the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Veruca Salt. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. Look over there, she screamed. What is it? He's moving. He's walking. It's a little person. It's a little man down there below the waterfall. Everybody stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. She's right, Grandpa. cried Charley. "It is a little man. Can you see him?" "I see him, Charley," said Grandpa Joe excitedly, and now everybody started shouting at once. "There's two of them! My gosh! There is. There's more than two. There's one, two, three, four, five. Look at them all, you guys. What are they doing? Where did they come from? Who are they?" Children and parents alike rushed down to the edge of the river to get a closer look. "Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Look at their funny long hair." The tiny men, they were no larger than a doll, had stopped what they were doing, and now they were staring across the river at the visitors. One of them pointed toward the children, and then he whispered something to the other four, and all five of them burst out into peals of laughter. "But they can't be real people," Charley said. "Of course they're real people," Mr. Wonka answered. "They're Oompa Loompas." The Oompa Loompas. "Oompa Loompas," everyone said at once. "Oompa Loompas. Imported direct from Oompa Land," said Mr. Wonka proudly. "There's no such place," said Mrs. Salt. "Excuse me, dear lady, but Mr. Wonka," cried Mrs. Salt, "I am a teacher of geography." "Then you know all about it," said Mr. Wonka. "And oh, what a terrible country it is. Nothing but thick jungles infested by the most dangerous beasts in the world. Hornswoggles and snozwangles and those terrible, wicked wangdoodles. A wangdoodle could eat 10 Oompa Loompas for breakfast and come galloping back for a second helping. When I went there, I found the little Oompa Loompas living in tree houses. They had to live in tree houses to escape from the wangdoodles and the hornswogglers and the snoozwanglers. And they were living on green caterpillars. And the caterpillars tasted revolting. And the Oompa Loompas spent every moment of their day climbing through the treetops looking for other things to mash up with the caterpillars, to make them try to taste better. Red beetles, for instance, and eucalyptus leaves, and the bark of a bonbon tree, all of them beastly, but not quite as beastly as the caterpillars. Poor little Oompa Loompas, the one food that they longed for more than anything was a cacao bean, but they couldn't get it. And Oompa Loompa was lucky if he found 3 or 4 cacao beans in a year. But oh, how they craved them. What do you think a cacao bean is? They used to dream about the cacao beans all night and talk about them all day. You had only to mention the word cacao to an Oompa Loompa, and he would start dribbling at the mouth. The cacao, Mr. Wonka continued, which grows on the cacao tree, happens to be the thing from which all, what guys? All chocolate is made. You cannot make chocolate without the cacao. Oh, there they are. They're up in their tree, and Willy Wonka is looking up at them. The cacao beans is chocolate. I myself use billions of cacao beans every week in this factory. And so, my dear children, as soon as I discovered that the Oompa Loompas were crazy about this particular food, I climbed up to their treehouse village and poked my head in through the door up to the treehouse belonging to the leader of the tribe. The poor fellow looked thin and starving, and he was sitting there trying to eat a bowl full of mashed up green caterpillars without being sick. "Look here," I said, speaking not English, of course, but in Oompa Loompa. "Look here, if you and all your people would come back to my country and live in my factory, you can have all the cacao beans you want. I've got mountains of them in my storehouse. You can have cacao beans for every meal. You can gorge yourself silly on them. I'll even pay you wages in cacao beans if you wish." "You really mean it?" asked the Oompa Loompa leader, leaping from his chair. "Of course I mean it," I said. "You can have chocolate as well. Chocolate tastes even better than cacao beans because it's got milk and sugar added. The little man gave a great whoop of joy and threw his bowl of mashed caterpillars right out of the treehouse window. It's a deal, he cried. Come on, everybody, let's go. So I shipped them all over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in a large packing case with holes in it, and they all got here safely. I don't know if I'd like that. They are wonderful workers. They all speak English now. They love dancing and music. They are always making up songs. I expect you'll hear a good deal of singing today from time to time. I must warn you, though, that they are rather mischievous. They like jokes, and they still wear the same kind of clothes they wore in the jungle. They insist upon that. The men, as you see for yourself across the river, wear only deer skins. The women wear leaves, and the children wear nothing at all. The women use fresh leaves every day. Daddy! Shouted Veruca Salt, the girl who screamed Veruca. Are you liking Veruca, everybody? All right, Veruca, all right. But I can't get it for you this second. Please be patient. I'll see if you have one before the day is out. Augustus, shouted Mrs. Gloop. Augustus, sweetheart, I don't think you had better do that. Augustus Gloop, as you might have guessed, had quietly sneaked down to the edge of the river, and he was now kneeling on the riverbank, scooping hot melted chocolate into his mouth as fast as he could. Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned around and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "Oh, no, please, Augustus, please! I beg of you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." Augustus, called Mrs. Gloop, didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once. This stuff is fabulous, said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. Gosh, I need a bucket to drink it all properly. Augustus, cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and waggling his stick in the air. You must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate. Augustus, cried Mrs. Gloop. Augustus, cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying lengthwise on the ground, with his head far out over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. I don't think my dog would like that. Besides, dogs aren't good. Chocolate isn't good for dogs. Augustus, shouted Mrs. Gloop, you're giving that nasty cold of yours to about 1 billion people all over the country. Be careful, Augustus, shouted Mr. Gloop. You're leaning too far out. Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop. In one second, he disappeared under the ground surface. Save him! Screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him! Good heavens, woman, said Mr. Gloop. I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on. Augustus Gloop's face came up against the surface, came up again to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. Help, 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 he cried. Fish me out. Don't just stand there, Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. Do something. Oh, look at Augustus. He is in quite a chocolate mess. I am doing something, said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer toward the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. Then all at once, the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the riverbank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. There he goes, shouted someone, pointing upwards. And sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting up inside, head first like a tornado. Help! Murder! Police! Screamed Mrs. Gloop. Augustus, come back at once! Where are you going? It's a wonder to me, said Mr. Gloop, how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it. It isn't big enough, said Charlie Bucket. Oh dear, looks like he's slowing down. So he is, said Grandpa Joe. He's going to stick, said Charlie. I think he is, said Grandpa Joe. By golly, he has stuck, said Charlie. It's his stomach that's done it. Sorry, guys. It's his stomach that's done it, said Mr. Gloop. He's blocked the whole pipe, said Grandpa Joe. Smash the pipe, yelled Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. Augustus, come out of there at once. The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, and they could see Bill behind it in a solid mass pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! He shot up again like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. He's disappeared, yelled Mrs. Gloop. Where does that pipe go? Quick, call the fire brigade. Keep calm, cried Mr. Wonka. Keep calm, my dear lady, keep calm. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has just gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey, but he'll come out just fine, you'll see. How can he possibly come out fine? Snapped Mrs. Gloop. He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. Impossible, cried Mr. Wonka. Unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd. He could never be made into marshmallows. And why not, may I ask? Shouted Mrs. Gloop. Because that pipe doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to go directly to the room where I make the most delicious kind of strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge. Then he'll be made into strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge, screamed Mrs. Gloop. My poor Augustus! They'll be selling him by the pound all over the country by tomorrow morning. Quite right, said Mr. Gloop. I know I'm right, said Mrs. Gloop. It's not a joke, said Mr. Gloop. Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so, cried Mrs. Gloop. Just look at him, he's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh like that when my boy's just gone up that pipe? You monster, she shrieked, pointing her elephant at umbrella, not elephant, at Mr. Wonka as though she were going to run him through. You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy into your fudge room like that is just one big colossal joke? He'll be perfectly safe, said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. He can't be chocolate, cried Mrs. Gloop. Of course he will be, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. I won't allow it, cried Mr. Wonka. And why not? Shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Because the taste would be terrible, said Mr. Wonka. Just imagine it. Augustus-flavored chocolate-coated Gloop. No one would buy it. They most certainly would, cried Mr. Gloop indignantly. I don't want to think about it, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Nor do I, said Mr. Wonka. And I do promise you, madame, that your darling will be perfectly safe. If he's perfectly safe, then where is he? Snapped Mrs. Gloop. Lead me to him this instant. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, 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 3 times. Immediately, an Oompa Loompa appeared as if from nowhere and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair golden brown, and the top of his head came just about the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. Now listen to me, said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find their son Augustus. He's just gone through the pipe. And there's Mrs. Gloop. Look how little the Oompa Loompa is. The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. Oh, do be quiet, said Mr. Wonka. Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think it's funny. You could say that again, said Mrs. Gloop. Go straight to the fudge room, Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa. And when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there. But you'd better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get poured out into the fudge boiler. And that really would be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite unedible. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek of fury. I'm joking, said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. I didn't mean it. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop and Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. I'll see you later. As Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing around and beating upon a number of very small drums. Augustus Gloop, they chanted. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop. Grandpa, cried Charley. Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing? Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe. I think they're going to sing us a song. Augustus Gloop, chanted the Oompa Loompas. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop. The great big greedy Minnie can poop. How long could we allow this beast to gorge and guzzle, feed and feast on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this pig might live, we're positive he'd never ever give even the smallest bit of fun or happiness to anyone. To gorge and guzzle, feed and feast on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this pig must live, we're positive he'd never give even the smallest bit of fun or happiness to anyone. So what we do in cases such as this, we must use a gentle touch and be careful we take the brat and turn him into something that will give great pleasure to all of us. A doll, for instance, or a ball, a marble, or a rocking horse. But this revolting boy, of course, was so utterly vile, so greedy, foul, and infantile, he left a most disgusting taste inside our mouths, and so in haste we choose a thing, come that may, would take the nasty taste away. Come on, he cried, the time is right. More of the song. To send him shooting up the pipe, he has to go, it has to be, and very soon he's going to see, inside the room to which he's gone, some funny things are going on. But don't, dear children, be alarmed. Augustus Gloop will not be harmed. Although, of course, we must admit he will be altered quite a bit. He'll be changed from where he's been when he goes through the fudge machine. Slowly the wheels go round and round. The clogs begin to grind and pound. 100 knives go slice, slice, slice. We add some sugar, cream, and spice. We boil him for a minute more until we're absolutely sure that all the greed and all the gall is boiled away for once and for all. Then he comes out, and now by grace, this, just a minute, guys, sorry. And now, by grace, a miracle has taken place. This boy, who only just before was loathed by men from shore to shore, this greedy brute, this louse's ear, is loved by people everywhere, for those who could hate or bear a grudge against a luscious bit of fudge. I told you they love singing, said Mr. Wonka. Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? And you mustn't believe a word they said. It's all nonsense, every bit of it. Are the Oompa Loompas really joking? Grandpa asked Charley. Of course they're joking, answered Grandpa Joe. They must be joking. At least I hope they're joking, don't you? Down the chocolate river. Off we go, cried Mr. Wonka. Hurry up, everyone. Follow me to the next room. And please don't worry about Augustus Gloop. He's bound to come out in the wash. They always do. We shall have to make the next part of the journey by boat. Here she comes. Look at her. A steamy mist was rising up from a great chocolate river. And out of the mist there appeared suddenly the most fantastic pink boat. It was a large open rowboat with a tall front and a tall back, like a Viking boat of old. And it was of such a shining, sparkling, glistening pink color that the whole thing looked as though it was made of some bright pink glass. There were many oars on either side of it, and as the boat came closer, the watchers on the riverbank could see that the oars were being pulled by masses of Oompa Loompas, at least 10 of them to each side, to each oar. This is my private yacht, cried Mr. Wonka, beaming with pleasure. I made her by hollowing out an enormous boiled sweet. Isn't she beautiful? See how she comes cutting through the river? The gleaming pink boiled sweet boat glided up to the riverbank. 100 Oompa Loompas rested on their oars and stared up at the visitors. Then suddenly, for some reason best known to themselves, they all burst into shrieks of laughter again. What's so funny? Asked Violet Beauregard. Oh, don't worry about them, cried Mr. Wonka. They're always laughing. They think everything is a colossal joke. Jump into the boat, all of you. Come on, hurry up. As soon as everyone was safely in, the Oompa Loompas pushed the boat away from the bank and began to row swiftly downriver. Hey there, Mike Treevy, shouted Mr. Wonka. Please do not lick the boat with your tongue. It'll make it sticky. Daddy, said Veruca Salt, I want a boat like this. I want you to buy me a big, pink, boiled sweet boat exactly like Mr. Wonka's. And I want lots of Oompa Loompas to roll me about. And I want a chocolate river. And she wants a good kick in the pants, whispered Grandpa Joe to Charley. The old man was sitting in the back of the boat, and little Charley Bucket was right beside him. Charley was holding tightly onto his grandfather's bony old hand. He was a whirl of excitement. Everything that he had seen so far, the great chocolate river, the waterfall, the huge sucking pipes, the minty sugar meadows, the Oompa Loompas, the most beautiful boat, and most of all, Mr. Willy Wonka himself. None of it had ever been so astonishing, and he began to wonder whether they could possibly have any more astonishments left. Where were they going now? What were they going to see? And what in the world was going to happen in the next room? Isn't it marvelous? Said Grandpa Joe, grinning at Charley. Grandpa nodded and smiled up at the old man. Suddenly, Mr. Wonka, who was sitting on Charley's other side, reached down into the bottom of the boat, picked up a little mug, dipped it into the river, and filled it with chocolate, and he handed it to Charley. Drink this, he said. It'll do you good. You look starved to death. Then Mr. Wonka lifted a second mug and gave it to Grandpa Joe. You too, he said. You look like a skeleton. What's the matter? Hasn't there been enough of anything to eat in your house lately? Not much, said Grandpa Joe. Charley put the mug to his lips. As the rich, warm, creamy chocolate ran down his throat into his empty tummy, his whole body from head to toe began to tingle with pleasure, and a feeling of intense happiness spread over him. You like it? Asked Mr. Wonka. Oh, it's wonderful, Charley said. The creamiest, loveliest chocolate I've ever tasted, said Grandpa Joe, smacking his lips. Then that's because it's been mixed by the waterfall, Mr. Wonka told him. The boat sped on down the river. The river was getting narrower. There was some kind of a dark tunnel ahead, a great round tunnel that looked like an enormous pipe, and the river was running right into the tunnel. And so was the boat. Row on, shouted Mr. Wonka, jumping up and waving his stick in the air. Full speed ahead. And with the Oompa Loompas rowing faster than ever, the boat shot into the pitch-dark tunnel, and all the passengers screamed with excitement. How can they see where they're going? Shrieked Violet Beauregard in the darkness. There's no knowing where they're going, cried Mr. Wonka, hooting with laughter. There's no earthly way of knowing the direction in which we're going. There's no not knowing where we're rowing, and which way the river's flowing. Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing. For the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing. He's gone off his rocker, shouted one of the fathers, aghast that the other parents joined in. Of choruses of frightened shouting. He's crazy, they shouted. He's balmy, he's nutty, he's screwy, he's batty. He's dippity, dottity, he's daffity, he's goofy, he's beany, he's buggy, he's wacky, he's loony. No, he is not, said Grandpa Joe. Switch on the lights, shouted Mr. Wonka, and suddenly came on the lights and the whole tunnel was brightly lit up. Charley could see that they were inside a gigantic pipe, and the great upward curtains wall were of pure white, spotless clean. The river of chocolate was flowing very fast inside the pipe, and the Oompa Loompas were all rowing like mad, and the boat was rocking along at a furious pace. Mr. Wonka was jumping up and down in the back of the boat and calling to the rowers to go faster and faster. He seemed to love the sensation of whizzing through the white tunnel in the pink boat on the chocolate river, and he clapped his hands and laughed and kept glancing at his passengers to see if they were enjoying it as much as he. Look, Grandpa, cried Charley, there's a door in the wall. It was a green door, and it was set into the wall of the tunnel just above the level of the river. As they flashed past it, there was just enough time to read the writing on the door. Storeroom number 54, it said. All the creams, dairy cream, whipped cream, violet cream, coffee cream, pineapple cream, vanilla cream, and hair cream. Hair cream, cried Mike TV. You don't use hair cream? Roll on, shouted Mr. Wonka. There's no time to answer silly questions. They streaked past a black door. Storeroom number 71, it said on it. Whips, all shapes and sizes. Whips? Cried Veruca Salt. What on earth do you use whips for? For whipping cream, of course, said Mr. Wonka. How can you whip cream without whips? Whipped cream isn't whipped cream unless it's been whipped with whips. Just as a poached egg isn't a poached egg unless it's been stolen from the woods in the dead of night. Row on, please. They passed a yellow door on which it said storeroom number 77. All the beans, cacao beans, coffee beans, jelly beans, and has-beens. Has-beens, cried Violet Beauregard. You're one yourself, said Mr. Wonka. There's no time for arguing. Press on, press on. But 5 seconds later, when a bright red door came into sight, he suddenly waved his gold-topped cane in the air and shouted, Stop the boat! All right, one more chapter and then we'll stop for today. The Inventing Room, Everlasting Gobstoppers and Hair Toffee. Ooh. When Mr. Wonka shouted, Stop the boat, the Oompa Loompas jammed their oars into the river and backed water furiously. The boat stopped. The Oompa Loompas guided the boat along the red door. On the door it said, Inventing Room, Private, Keep Out. Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat, and put the key in the keyhole. This is the most important room in the entire factory, he said. All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. Just for, let's see, old Fickle Gruber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside for just 3 minutes. So would Prodnose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now, listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is that agreed? Yes, yes, the children cried. We won't touch a thing. Up to now, Mr. Wonka said, nobody else, not even the Oompa Loompas, has ever been allowed in here. He opened the door and stepped out of the boat into the room. The 4 children and their parents all scrambled in after him. Don't touch, shouted Mr. Wonka, and don't knock anything over. Charlie Bucket stared around the gigantic room in which he now found himself. The place was like a witch's kitchen. All around him were black metal pots. And they were boiling and bubbling on huge stoves, and kettles were hissing, and pans were sizzling, and strange iron machines were clanking and sputtering, and there were pipes running all over the ceiling and the walls, and the whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious, rich smells. Mr. Wonka himself had suddenly become even more excited. He'd become even more excited than usual, and anyone could see that this was the room he loved the most. He was hopping around among the saucepans and the machines like a child at his Christmas presents, not knowing which thing to look at first. He lifted a lid from a huge pot and took a sniff. Then he rushed over and dipped a finger into a barrel of sticky yellow stuff and had a taste. Then he skipped across to one of the machines and turned half a dozen knobs this way and that. Then he peered anxiously through the glass door into a gigantic oven, rubbing his hands and cackling with delight at what he saw inside. Then he ran over to another machine, small, shiny affair that kept going. And every time it went, a large green marble dropped out of into the basket on the floor. At least it looked like a marble. Everlasting gobstoppers, cried Mr. Wonka proudly. They're completely new. I am inventing them for children who are given very little pocket money. You can put an everlasting gobstopper in your mouth, and you can suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it, and will never get any smaller. It's like gum, cried Violet Beauregard. It is not like gum, said Mr. Wonka. Gum is for chewing, and if you tried chewing one of these gobstoppers here, you'd break your teeth off. And they never get any smaller. They never disappear. Never. At least, I don't think they do. There's been one being tested this very moment in the testing room next door, and Oompa Loompa is sucking it. He's been sucking it for nearly a year now without stopping, and it's still just as good as ever. Now, over here, Mr. Wonka went on, skipping excitedly across the room to the opposite wall. Over here, I'm inventing a completely new line in toffees. He stopped beside a large saucepan. The saucepan was full of thick, gooey, purplish treacle, boiling and bubbling. By standing on his toes, little Charlie could see inside it. That's hair toffee, cried Mr. Wonka. You eat just one tiny little bit of it, and in exactly half an hour, a brand new, luscious, thick, silky, beautiful crop of hair will start growing all over the top of your head. And a mustache and a beard. A beard? Cried Veronica Salt. Who wants a beard, for heaven's sake? It would suit you quite well, said Mr. Wonka, but unfortunately the mixture's not quite right yet. I've got it too strong. It works too well. I tried it on an Oompa Loompa yesterday in the testing room, and immediately a huge black beard started shooting out of his chin. And the beard grew so fast that soon it was trailing all over the floor in a thick, hairy carpet. I wouldn't like that. It was growing faster than we could cut it. In the end, we had to use a lawnmower to keep it in check. But I'll get the mixture right soon. And when I do, then there'll be no more excuse for any little boys and girls going around with bald heads. But Mr. Wonka, said Mike TV, little boys and girls do not go about with. Don't argue, my dear child. Please don't argue, cried Mr. Wonka. It's such a waste of precious time. Now, over here, if you will all step this way, I will show you something that I am terrifically proud of. Oh, do be careful. Don't knock anything over. Stand back. All right, we are going to end right here where they're waiting for a very terrifically important thing to see. So I see that there's an announcement put up. Everybody can put on your calendars. This is an exciting one. Church on Sunday, March 7th. 25 people may attend the service live at Project ID. You will need to sign up with Lisa Pisani by calling 509-994-1840 or email her at lisap@projectidspokane.org. So exciting. Our first thing happening again in the building since a year ago. So that is very exciting. Okay, so if you want, we're going to continue on with Charley and the Chocolate Factory. There are so many wonderful things to see and so much trouble for Charley's tour mates to get into. Because we have Violet, who wants everything, and Veronica, who only loves her gum, and then Mr. TV, who wants nothing more than TV. So let's see what kind of trouble they can get into next week. And everybody pray that we get to do it 2 weeks in a row this time. I promise that Bob and I will try really hard. Stay safe, stay happy, and maybe we'll see you in March or April. Love you guys. Bye.
There is a special place where adults with developmental disabilities can go to find a safe haven, a place of wonderful opportunities and joy. Project ID has social opportunities, meal programs, fun recreation, career development, church services, and the largest Special Olympic team in the state. Project ID is a real community treasure. Please be a volunteer, sponsor a member, or donate what you can to Project ID, Identity Beyond Disability.